Hello mga ka-micro! Welcome to our second video lecture on microbiology. Pinag-usapan natin from our first video lecture yung introductory or introduction to microbiology. So sa mga hindi pa po nakakapanood, please watch it on my YouTube channel and Facebook channel which I posted also in the comment section below. Importante po guys na magkaroon muna kayo ng prior knowledge from our previous lecture in order for you to digest well our topic for today. For this video lecture, pag-uusapan natin is all about cell. Cell as a topic is quite broad, so let's focus more on the introductory part as well as the overview of the history, types, and cell structures. Itong mga gumagalaw na maliliit, these are examples of cell, specifically normal human cells, viewed under an inverted light microscope. I still remember when I worked before in cancer research, ito po yung more sophisticated type ng microscope na ginagamit namin to view the cancer cells, especially the structures and their movements. Ang pinagkaiba niya lang po sa mga common compound light microscope is that yung lenses and objectives is naka-position invertedly sa ilalim ng ating sample stage. The reason why na-inverted yung lenses kasi mas klaro yung cell attachment and movements underneath the culture flask na ilalagay natin sa sample stage. This equipment is not only good to be used for cancer research study, but pwede din siyang gamitin to view other cells such as bacteria, fungi, parasites, and other microorganisms. For today's lecture, first, pag-uusapan natin yung definition ng cell and ano yung major types of cells. Let's also talk about a little bit of history of cells, starting from the discovery of cell, and sino yung mga scientists who first studied cells in details. And through their discovery, na-establish yung cell theory. Establishment ng cell theory is important in understanding biology because as we know, cells form the basis of life here on Earth. And for the last part of the lecture, aalamin natin yung common structures or parts na makikita sa different types of cells. Ano nga ba ang cell? Cell is basically the basic unit of life. When you say basic unit of life, ito yung bumubuo sa mga organisms or yung mga may buhay na alam mo. Kung microorganisms, just like a bacterium on a slide and viewed under microscope, yung isang buong structure na pabilog or oval in shape is isang cell na yan. If we are talking multicellular organisms naman, meaning organisms composed of many cells, in fact, millions or billions of cells in just one structure or body. Ito yung mga plants, animals, humans, and other complex organisms. In a sample analogy, imagine that you are building a concrete house. Ano nga ba yung foundation na ina-assemble together to form a concrete house? It's the hollow blocks. So imagine, itong mga hollow blocks, ito yung bumubuo sa tao for example. So hindi ganito yung itsura natin ngayon and hindi tayo magkakabuhay kung hindi dahil sa pinagpatong-patong na mga cells. So it's amazing how humans and other multicellular organisms are made up of these little factories that were put up together to form a complex life form. Try to imagine also that every second of our lives, every cells ng ating body ay nag-absorb ng nutrients from the food that we eat and nagfa-function at gumagawa ng products na kailangan natin para mabuhay. For example, yung immune cells na always nagpapatrol sa loob ng katawan 24/7 to defend our body from unwanted insiders like yung pathogens or germs na pumapasok sa katawan. Or in the case ng ating skin cells, meron tayong minor wounds, di ba? After few days, napapansin nyo na gumagaling siya on its own. It is because part ito ng trabaho ng ating cells. May kakayahan silang makapag-regenerate or makapagparami at bumuo ng new cells. So bottom line, yung cells is the actual and literal definition of life. No life if there's no cells and no organisms if there's no cells. Alam niyo ba na ang word cell came from the original Latin term cellula, a term coined by a scientist named Robert Hooke. Siya ang kauna-unahang scientist who first discovered cell with the use of his microscope. And lahat ng kanyang mga drawings and descriptions are documented in his journal called Micrographia. Robert Hooke first discovered the cells by cutting a thin portion from a cork and viewed it in his microscope. To his surprise, he saw a honeycomb-like structures or box-shaped structures with empty compartments separated by thin walls. Yung first word na binigkas niya upon seeing these structures is the word cellula, which reminds him of the small rooms in the monastery which the monks resided. Before kasi, yung cellula na word ang ginagamit to describe a room na maliit and tinitirhan ng mga monks or common people. The discovery of cells by Robert Hooke is very important that paved the way in establishing the classical cell theory. And also based on his discovery, other scientists followed his path and started investigating the microscopic world with the use of magnifying tools such as microscope. Just like in the case ni Antony van Leeuwenhoek, first person na nakakita ng actual microorganisms like bacteria in environmental samples. A century later on, from the time when Robert Hooke first discovered the cell, and with the inventions of more sophisticated microscopes with greater magnifications, may dalawang scientists who proposed the cell theory. Sila ay si Matthias Claden, a botanist, and a zoologist, Theodore Swan. They started to collect plant and animal samples and viewed them under the microscope. All their documentations were published, and together with this, they proposed the cell theory. Yung cell theory is all about the conclusions of all their experiments. First, they conclude that cell is the basic building block of life. Second, lahat ng organisms ay binubuo ng isa or maraming cells. And lastly, lahat ng cells ay nanggaling mula sa existing cells. Meaning, pinapakita dito na yung cells ay may kakayahang dumami mula sa pag-divide ng mother cell. Importante yung implications, especially yung pag-propose ng cell theory, because through this, it provided good foundation for the succeeding scientific community in understanding the organization, function, and diversity of living organisms. Also, nang dahil sa cell theory, nag-advance yung scientific research and discoveries across various fields. Since alam na natin kung ano ang cell, let's talk now about the types of cells. Yung cells po natin ay nahati into two major types. The prokaryotic cell and then the eukaryotic cell. Ano ang pinagkaiba nilang dalawa? Ang prokaryotic cell ay usually unicellular or single-celled microorganisms. Examples are bacteria and archaea. While ang eukaryotes naman are composed of diverse and more complex organisms such as plants, protists, fungi, and animals. The human cells fall under the animal cells since we are evolutionarily considered as animals. For the last part of our topic, let's learn now about the common parts of the cells and especially try natin i-compare yung differences in the structures between the two major types of cells. For prokaryotic cell, our representative is a bacterium, and for eukaryote, we have here an animal cell. When it comes to structures, mas complex yung eukaryotes natin because they have membrane-bound organelles na hindi makikita sa ating prokaryotic cell. When you say organelles, ito po yung mga internal structures na may specific function sa ating cell. Examples of these are the mitochondria, yung endoplasmic reticulum, yung smooth and rough ER, the nucleus, Golgi apparatus, and the cytoskeleton such as centriole. Since eukaryotes are complex organisms compared to prokaryotes, mas marami din yung functions nila. That's why They needed these specialized organelles to perform these functions and thus supporting also the overall health of the cell. Try to imagine na yung isang cell natin ay isang factory building that manufactures certain products. And these organelles here are just different departments which gumagawa ng different functions, but all of these labors or workforce all support for the cell objectives, which is to produce products such as proteins, sugars, lipids, nutrients, and vitamins, which is essential to form or maintain life that we know. So kahit natutulog tayo sa gabi, we are still assured that our cells are still doing their jobs to keep us alive. May mga common structures din tayo na makikita sa lahat ng cells, prokaryotes or eukaryotes man. One is the cell membrane. Ito po yung structure that serves as the protective barrier or parang skin ng cells that separates the internal structures sa kanyang environment. Aside from protection, marami pang function ang cell membrane such as cell signaling, cell adhesion, transport, and exchange of nutrients, and many more, which pag-uusapan natin in more details sa part 2 ng video lecture. Next is the cytoplasm. Ito yung jelly-like substance that fills the cells and hold internal organelles together, which also keeps the cell its shape. Lastly is the ribosome. Ribosome is one of the most important organelle ng ating cell in all cells because without this structure, hindi makakapag-produce ng proteins ang ating cells. Sir, gaano nga ba ka-importante ang protein sa cells? Napaka-importante ang proteins because it is one of the macromolecules that the cells need to perform essential functions na kinakailangan ng isang organisms to maintain its life. For example, proteins are involved in structural support, ginagamit sa enzymatic reactions, cell signaling, transport of nutrients among cells, for immune response, gene expression, and other critical processes na nangyayari sa loob ng isang organism. Kung walang proteins, life as we know would not be possible. Nandito na po tayo sa last slide ng ating lecture for today. And now, let's differentiate further the prokaryote from the eukaryotic cells. First in the list, alam na natin yung example ng prokaryotic organisms such as bacteria and archaea. And for the eukaryote naman, we have more complex organisms such as protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Second, sa eukaryotes lang makikita ang true nucleus, and usually sa prokaryotes, ang essential genetic materials ng cells for growth mostly makikita sa nucleus region. When it comes to size naman, mas maliit yung prokaryote with size ranging from 1 to 5 micrometer as compared sa size ng eukaryotic cell. Yung DNA ng prokaryote ay usually circular in shape and in proportion din sa size nila. Isa itong arrangement ng cell para maging compact yung genetic material niya for efficient genetic structure para din mas madali sa kanya ang pag-grow and reproduce. While for eukaryotic cell, since mas malaki talaga yung genetic material niya, naka-linear yung arrangement ng DNA, it's because through this arrangement, it increased the genetic complexity, regulation, and functionality of the cell. So in simpler terms, nang dahil sa arrangement na ito, nakakapag-perform ng mas complex processes yung eukaryotic cell to support its complex activities. Since ang DNA sa eukaryotic cell is makikita sa nucleus, which is doon nangyayari yung transcription ng DNA to RNA. And then pag lumabas na din yung RNA transcript sa nucleus, doon naman siya itatranslate ng ribosome na makikita sa cytoplasm. Unlike prokaryotic cell, ang RNA and protein synthesis all takes place sa cytoplasm dahil wala po silang nucleus. When it comes to ribosomes, yung prokaryotes ay merong 70S ribosomes, which is combination na ito siya ng 50S and 30S ribosomal subunit. This is a type of ribosome na mas maliit at compact compared sa 80S ribosome ng eukaryotes. If you would ask bakit magkaiba sila ng ribosome subunit, it is primarily because of their evolutionary history. But we will not give details to that. Next is, prokaryotes has single chromosome, while prokaryotes naman has more than one. When you say chromosome, ito yung thread-like structures that are composed of the DNA of the cells and proteins. When it comes to reproduction naman or cell division, yung prokaryotic cell undergoes a sexual type of reproduction called binary fission. When you say asexual reproduction, the bacteria, for example, it divides or split into two cells on its own, forming two genetically identical cells at the end of the process. Di kagaya ng sa eukaryotes na wherein meron tayong two modes of replication ng cells, and that is the mitosis and meiosis. Ang mitosis ay para lang din siyang binary fission sa bacteria in which two genetically identical cells are produced at the end of the process. And usually, ito yung mode of replication ng ating mga somatic cells, for example. Skin cells or epithelial cells are examples of those cells and other general body cells natin. When you say meiosis naman, ito yung specialized mode of replication ng ating sex cells. The egg cells and sperm cells of human and animals are the examples of these sex cells. In this type of replication, the egg cell and the sperm cells will combine together para bumuo ng fertilized egg, which then divides into two phases, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. At the end of the meiosis 2, meron tayong new 4 daughter cells na may magkakaiba-iba ng genetic material to each other. This replication ensures that new generations of organisms are merong genetic diversity individually. Next is referring to the membranes. Pag eukaryotes, meron silang membrane and membrane-bound organelles na naka-attach sa kanila. Usually, these are protein structures. Unlike prokaryotes, simple lang yung structure ng cell membrane nila. Pag prokaryotes, these are single cells. And pag eukaryotes naman, they could be single cell in the case of protists, or they form colonies such as volvox, a type of algae, and majority are multicellular. In terms of movement, ang ginagamit na structures ng ating prokaryotes is flagella. Ito yung buntot nila and they are made up of flagellin proteins to help them move. While sa eukaryotes, maraming structures for locomotion such as flagella made of microtubules na proteins, cilia, lamellipodia, and filopodia. When it comes to organelles naman, na may kinalaman for energy productions ng cells such as mitochondria and chloroplast, makikita lamang ito sila sa eukaryotes. That's why yung internal structure ng eukaryotes natin is complex compared to prokaryotes. Thank you guys for watching. I hope marami kayong natutunan for today's lesson, and I want to congratulate Yuka Micro for making it until the end of the lecture. I am asking for your support guys to follow my Facebook page as well as my YouTube channel para updated po kayo sa mga videos na i-upload ko in the future. Please abangan nyo po yung part 2 ng Introduction to Cell. Let's explore microbiology together. Bye!